I'm 34 years old and I've been married to Elena for 4 years. She's the only daughter of Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Pharmaceuticals, one of Boston's largest biotech companies. The Sterling family is serious money, the kind that gets written about in Forbes and attends private galas where tickets cost more than most people's cars. Their estate in Wellesley is 6 acres of manicured perfection, the type of place where even the gardening staff has advanced degrees. Meanwhile, everyone thinks I'm just some guy who does freelance data analysis from our apartment. I tell people I make about $65,000 a year. Nothing special. Elena and I live in a two-bedroom rental in Somerville. I drive a 2016 Honda Civic with 112,000 miles on it. Her parents have made it abundantly clear for 4 years that I'm basically the worst decision their daughter ever made. Here's what nobody knows except my legal team and financial advisors. I own 51% of Sterling Pharmaceuticals. I'm the majority shareholder. My stake is currently valued at roughly $8.3 billion. Richard Sterling, Elena's father, essentially works for me. He has absolutely no idea. This sounds completely insane, so let me explain how this happened. When I turned 26, I graduated from Stanford with degrees in biochemistry and business analytics. That same year, my uncle died and left me $400,000. Most people I knew took their money and bought boats, expensive cars, started living large. I went a completely different direction. I spent 8 months researching pharmaceutical companies that got destroyed during the 2015 biotech crash. I was specifically looking for firms with strong drug pipelines, but catastrophic debt situations. Companies run by brilliant scientists who were terrible at finance. That's when Sterling Pharmaceuticals caught my attention. Richard had made a fortune developing treatments for rare diseases, but he'd gone on a massive expansion spree right before everything crashed. He'd taken on enormous debt to fund clinical trials that were years from payoff. By early 2016, the company was bleeding cash. Traditional venture capital wouldn't touch him because everyone thought biotech was toxic. The stock had fallen from $120 per share to under $3. Wall Street was writing obituaries, but I saw something different. The drug pipeline was solid, the science was legitimate. They had 3 compounds in phase 3 trials that looked promising. Richard himself was a genuinely talented researcher. What the company desperately needed was capital and runway. Nobody in the market would provide either. So I created a shell company with a deliberately boring name, Redfield Investments. Started quietly buying Sterling Pharmaceuticals stock through multiple offshore entities designed so nobody could trace them back to me personally. The stock was trading at nothing, so my $400,000 went surprisingly far. Over the next 4 years, I accumulated 23% ownership. During that same period, I was also providing bridge financing through private placement deals that kept the company operational. Every time Richard needed funding for trials and couldn't get it anywhere else, Redfield Investments would appear with capital. He never asked detailed questions because he was desperate, and my terms were significantly better than the vulture funds circling his company. By the time I met Elena 3 years ago at a medical technology conference, I owned 38% of her father's business. I'd only gone to that event because a consulting client had a booth and needed extra help. Elena was there because her father had insisted she network for the family business, even though she had zero interest in pharmaceuticals. She worked as a therapist, helping trauma survivors process their experiences. We both ended up hiding from the same incredibly boring keynote speaker. She made me laugh with her spot-on impression of her father's scientific presentations, where he uses 10 words when one would work. I made her laugh by admitting I had no idea what half the acronyms at the conference even meant. We talked for hours. At the end of the night, she gave me her number, but warned me her family was obsessed with status and money, and if that was going to be a problem, we should probably just stay friends. I gave her the most honest answer I could without revealing everything, that a person's character matters more than their bank account. 6 months later, I proposed. Elena's mother, Victoria, had wanted a massive society wedding with 600 guests, photographers from lifestyle magazines, the works. Elena shut that down completely. We got married in a small ceremony at a friend's beach house with 40 people who actually mattered. Richard gave a wedding toast that barely masked his disappointment that his only daughter had married so far beneath her station. He made jokes about my earning potential and my future prospects. I smiled through every word, knowing the man mocking my modest income was only solvent because my investment fund had injected $600 million into his dying company over 4 years. By our wedding day, I owned 45% of Sterling Pharmaceuticals. Today, I own 51%, giving me majority control. Every board decision, every strategic initiative, every major move, I have final authority if I choose to use it. Richard has been essentially working for me for 6 years without the slightest clue. But this game came with real costs. Elena would stress about money constantly. She'd grown up in a mansion with staff, private schools, summer houses. Our apartment was nice, but it wasn't what she'd known. Our vacations were camping trips because I couldn't explain how we could afford European travel on my supposed $65,000 salary. She handled it better than I expected, never complaining, always insisting our relationship mattered more than lifestyle. But I could see the strain, especially during family events. Her mother would make comments about Elena's adjusted circumstances. Her father would tell long stories about successful young professionals in biotech, always making sure I understood I wasn't among them. Family dinners were brutal. I'd sit at the far end of the table while Elena's cousins, all with proper credentials from proper schools, discussed business strategy. Richard would explain basic pharmaceutical concepts to me like I was hearing them for the first time, completely oblivious that I understood his entire business model better than he did. Victoria would casually mention Elena's ex-boyfriend Marcus, who now ran his own hedge fund, wondering aloud how he was doing. After one particularly nightmare Christmas where Richard spent an hour lecturing me about FDA approval processes, Elena asked why I tolerated them treating me like that. I told her that Richard's opinion of me doesn't define my worth as a person, that the most powerful people in any room are usually the ones nobody's watching. She didn't fully understand what I meant, but she dropped it. The reality was, I was running an experiment. I wanted to see who these people truly were when they believed they had all the power and I had none. I wanted to know if they'd ever accept me for myself or if they only valued wealth and position. Every insult, every dismissive comment was data I was collecting, waiting for the right moment. Last Monday, Elena showed me a text from her mother. Victoria wanted us for dinner Friday evening. Just the four of us. Said it was important. Elena's voice had that tight quality that meant she knew something bad was coming. I told her we should definitely go. She suggested maybe we should cancel because when her parents get formal like this, someone usually gets hurt. But I insisted. My instinct said this dinner would be significant. Friday arrived and Elena spent 2 hours getting ready, changing outfits 5 times. I wore khakis and a button-down, the basic uniform of acceptable mediocrity. The Sterling estate is the type of property you see in architectural magazines. 6 acres, circular driveway, gardens that require a full-time team, a house that looks like a private museum. As we pulled up, Elena grabbed my hand and said that whatever they were planning, I should remember she chose me, and nothing could change that. Victoria answered the door herself, which was unusual since their housekeeper normally does that. She hugged Elena carefully, then acknowledged me like she was noting something unfortunate. The formal dining room was set for 4, but the setup screamed important occasion. Crystal that probably cost more than our annual rent. China that looked museum quality, enough silverware to confuse anyone who hadn't been raised with etiquette tutors. Richard was already at the head of the table wearing a full suit despite being in his own home, always performing, always reminding everyone of his authority. He shook my hand with that overly firm grip men use to establish dominance, said it was good of me to join them, phrased like I'd had a choice. First course arrived, conversation stayed neutral. Victoria asked Elena about her therapy practice. Richard mentioned a new drug application pending with the FDA. I played my role perfectly, asking enough questions to seem engaged, but never so many I might appear knowledgeable about the pharmaceutical industry I secretly controlled. Then as staff cleared the main course, Richard produced a leather portfolio, the expensive kind corporate lawyers carry. He launched into a speech about how he and Victoria had been thinking about Elena's well-being, her future, how important her happiness was. Victoria contributed about how much Alina had sacrificed marrying me. Her lifestyle, her opportunities, her social standing. Alina tried to interrupt, but Richard raised his hand, said they weren't there to criticize, but to solve a problem. Then he opened that portfolio. Inside was a stack of legal documents, and prominently displayed on top was a check. Even from across the table, I could see it was substantial. Richard said he believed in directness, that I seemed like a decent enough person, but they should be honest about what happened. I'd married significantly above my station. Not meant as an insult, just fact. Elena could have had anyone. She chose me. They tried to accept it, but Victoria continued. They couldn't watch their daughter struggle financially because of misplaced pride. So they developed a solution. Richard slid the portfolio toward me. Inside was a professionally prepared annulment agreement. Clipped to the front was a check for $750,000. He explained this represented more than I'd earn in a decade. Said I should sign the documents, take the money, move forward with my life. I'd be set up better than before, and Elena could resume a lifestyle suitable to her background. He delivered this with complete confidence, like someone who'd never been told no by anyone he considered inferior. The silence was remarkable. Elena looked physically struck. Victoria was examining her nails. Richard wore a satisfied smile like he'd just elegantly solved a complex problem. I picked up the check and examined it. $750,000 made out to me. For Richard, this probably represented a rounding error. For who he thought I was, it meant life-changing money. And that was the perfect irony. The man offering me $750,000 to abandon his daughter could only make that offer because I'd pumped billions into his failing company. I set the check down and said it was very generous. Richard's smile widened. Then I asked, just to confirm, whether he wanted me to sign away my marriage for $750,000. Victoria corrected me. Annulment, not divorce. Much cleaner, no fault, just mutual acknowledgement the marriage was a mistake. Elena stood so fast her chair scraped. Started shouting at them about how they could think they could purchase people. Richard told her to sit down, that adults were discussing things. She's 29 years old, and he dismissed her completely. But Richard wasn't looking at her anymore. He was focused on me, confident he'd already won. Said I clearly understood how the world worked, that money was the most honest way to resolve problems. I set the check down carefully, pulled out my phone, told them I needed to make one call before responding, asked if they'd excuse me briefly. Elena asked what I was doing. I explained I was ensuring everyone understood the complete picture. I called my attorney, James Morrison, who'd managed my pharmaceutical investments for 6 years, put him on speaker, asked if he could pull current ownership data for Sterling Pharmaceuticals. Richard frowned, asked what my attorney had to do with anything. I said everything. James came back. I asked him to explain to everyone present the ownership structure of Sterling Pharmaceuticals. James's voice filled the dining room, professional and methodical. Sterling Pharmaceuticals has 200 million outstanding shares. The largest shareholder is Redfield Investments with 102 million shares, representing 51% of the company. The next largest is Richard Sterling personally with 28 million shares, equal to 14%. The remaining 35% is distributed among various institutional investors. Richard stared at my phone like it was speaking a foreign language, demanded to know what this had to do with anything. I asked James to explain who owns Redfield Investments. James stated that Redfield Investments is wholly owned by me personally, established 6 years ago with inheritance money, serving as my primary investment vehicle. Current value of Sterling Pharmaceuticals holdings is approximately $8.3 billion based on today's closing price. The silence was total. Elena's mouth literally dropped open. Victoria went colorless. Richard looked like he'd been hit by a truck. He whispered he didn't understand. I picked up the check, said he was offering me $750,000 to walk away from Elena. Let that hang. Then continued. I own 51% of his company. At current market valuations, my stake is worth $8.3 billion. Did he grasp what that meant? James's voice came through again. It means I'm the majority shareholder in Sterling Pharmaceuticals. I possess controlling interest. In practical terms, I could remove Richard from his CEO position through a simple board vote. Richard's face shifted from white to deep red. started stuttering that it was impossible, that Redfield Capital was, then stopped mid-sentence. I finished his thought. Did he assume it was an institutional investor? Some anonymous hedge fund? He never asked because the capital kept flowing when he desperately needed it. 6 years ago, his company was drowning in debt. He couldn't get financing from traditional sources because everyone knew he'd overextended. When a mysterious investor started buying distressed shares and providing project capital, he didn't investigate too closely. I stood and walked until I was directly in front of him. Every significant drug trial over the past 6 years was financed with capital I provided. The Alzheimer's compound, my money. The rare disease treatment, my money. The oncology program that saved his company, entirely my money. Victoria found her voice, asked how I could be just a data analyst living in a tiny apartment. I explained I am a data analyst. I analyze pharmaceutical market data for specialized clients. That's not a lie, just incomplete truth. The apartment is modest because Elena and I chose modest. The car functions fine. I don't need to prove anything through displays of wealth. Elena was crying from anger, not sadness. Asked if I'd been watching them humiliate me, knowing I could destroy them with one call. I confirmed yes, but I wanted to discover who they genuinely were. Wanted to see how far they'd go when they believed they had all the power. I looked at Richard. Said turns out they'd go remarkably far. He started saying my name that he didn't know that I had to understand. I asked if it would have mattered. Would this offer be less insulting if I actually was who he thought? Would trying to purchase me away from his daughter be more justified? Victoria was crying now, mascara streaking. Said they were trying to protect Elena. I laughed without humor. Said they were trying to control her. Fundamental difference. I pulled out my phone, opened email. With quick taps, sent a message I'd had drafted for months. Told them I'd just emailed the board calling for an emergency meeting Monday morning. Agenda. Vote on the current CEO's position. Vincent stood rapidly, said I couldn't do this, that the board supported him. I corrected him, what we'd built together. And I noted 51% of voting shares support leadership change. I'd already discussed this with other shareholders. When we vote Monday, he'll be removed as CEO. Interim management would be installed while searching for permanent replacement. Richard shouted it was his company. He'd built it from nothing. Composure completely gone. I said quietly no, he'd built it to bankruptcy's edge. I saved it, and I did this while he treated me like I wasn't worth the oxygen at his table. I turned to Elena, staring at me like I was a stranger, apologized for not revealing truth sooner, said I'd wanted to tell her thousands of times, but needed to know if her family would ever accept me for who I am, not what I possess. Tonight answered that. She whispered, why? Why let them humiliate me when I could have just told the truth? I said because humiliation is temporary, while character is permanent. Her parents revealed their true selves tonight, offered money to make me abandon the person I loved most, valued social status above her happiness. Needed her to witness that too. I picked up the check and tore it in half. Told Richard I don't want his money. Never did. Wanted to belong to a family. Wanted to prove I could love his daughter without caring about her surname or inheritance. But he couldn't see that because he only saw someone beneath him. James spoke from the phone, asked if he should proceed with board notifications. I looked at Richard, collapsed in his chair, at Victoria clutching her pearls, at Elena, who deserved better than parents who measured love in currency. Told James, yes, proceed with everything. Time for new leadership. The drive home was silent for 20 minutes. Elena stared at city lights passing. Finally asked how long I'd been planning this. I answered honestly that I wasn't planning anything. I bought into her father's company years before meeting her because it was a solid investment. Meeting her, falling in love, that was pure chance. She said I could have told her any time during 4 years. I agreed, but asked if she would have believed I married her for herself, not family connections. Would she have believed I loved her for who she is rather than what she represented? She stayed quiet before admitting she didn't know. Probably not. I said that's exactly why I stayed silent. Wanted her to know beyond doubt I chose her when I had nothing to gain. Wanted her family to reveal their authentic selves. Tonight they did. She asked what happens now to her father's company. I assured her it would be fine, actually better. Installing professional management that understands modern pharma. Her father would be offered consulting role with reduced authority. She asked about our relationship with her parents. I said that was her decision. They're her parents. Won't force her to choose, but won't pretend what they did was acceptable. She reached over and took my hand, said she chooses me, has always chosen me, even when she thought I was just a data analyst with a civic and modest dreams. Asked why, especially then. She said because that version of me loved her without expecting anything. Chose her when he thought she was just a therapist with judgmental family. That's genuine, she said. That's what matters. We pulled into our apartment complex. I said, "We're keeping this place." She smiled genuinely for the first time since dinner. Agreed. Maybe we'll buy it instead of renting. But she liked our life, liked being normal, liked proving happiness doesn't require mansions. She asked about the money, noting $8.3 billion is substantial to ignore. I said, "We're not ignoring it. We're doing something meaningful." She's expanding her practice. We're funding mental health programs for underserved communities, establishing scholarship funds for therapy students. Monday, the board meeting proceeded as predicted. Richard was removed as CEO with 73% voting in favor. He sat diminished and humiliated while board members who'd spent years flattering him voted to strip his authority. Victoria called Elena 23 times that day. Elena ignored every call. Next day, a letter arrived certified mail. Handwritten note from Victoria. Said she didn't expect forgiveness, that what they'd done was unforgivable, but needed Elena to know they thought they were protecting her. Thought I was exploiting her. They were wrong. Terribly. Completely wrong. Richard was devastated. Not about the company, though that hurt, but about losing Alina and discovering the son-in-law he'd dismissed saved everything he'd built. Asked if they could talk when Alina was ready. Promised no more envelopes or checks. Just parents wanting to understand their daughter's husband. Elena read it twice. Asked what I thought. I said I think they're frightened and fear sometimes makes people honest in ways comfort never could. Told her I'd give them one chance, but on our terms. In our apartment. Without performances. If they can accept us as we are, maybe there's hope. If not, at least we'll know. Elena typed a response. Dinner at our place Friday. No dress code, no expectations, just family. Asked if it was too harsh. I said it was perfect. That Friday, Richard and Victoria arrived looking smaller. Richard wore jeans, Victoria minimal makeup. They'd left their armor behind. We sat around our small table eating pasta Elena made. No servers, no crystal, just 4 people attempting to rebuild something shattered. Richard spoke first, said he owed me several apologies, for every dinner where he made me feel insignificant, for every comment about my career, for that check, for treating me like I was worth exactly $750,000 when I was the man who saved his company and loved his daughter. I said I appreciated that, but the apology I really needed was the one he gives Elena. She's the one they tried to control, whose happiness they valued less than status. Richard turned to Elena with tears forming. Said he was sorry. Sorry he couldn't see what she saw in me. Sorry he made her feel her choice wasn't good enough. She found someone who loves her for who she is, who didn't need money or name. That's what every father should want. He nearly destroyed it through pride. Victoria reached across and took Alina's hand, said she'd spent Alina's life preparing her for a certain future. When Alina chose differently, she felt rejected. But Alina wasn't rejecting anything. She was choosing something real over something hollow. Apologized for taking so long to understand. Elena was crying, but didn't pull away. Asked if they meant it because she couldn't endure another night like last Friday. Couldn't watch them treat me like I'm inadequate when I'm the best man she's known. They both said they meant it and would prove it. Richard asked to take me to lunch. Just us. Said he wanted to learn my business philosophy, investment strategy, everything he should have asked about instead of dismissing me. I looked at Alina, who nodded. Told Richard lunch sounded good, but he needed to understand something. I didn't buy into his company to control or hurt him. Did it because it was solid investment. Won't apologize for being good at something he didn't know I could do. He said he wouldn't expect that. Just hoped I'd teach him because apparently he'd been running a company without understanding who really kept it alive. 4 months later, Sterling Pharmaceuticals announced major restructuring. Richard remained on board as senior advisor. Operations handled by professionals who turned things around. Stock price climbed 56% since management change. Elena's practice received a $40 million grant from the Morrison Family Foundation I established. We fund mental health programs, scholarships, initiatives helping people who are talented but lack resources. Richard and Victoria come to our apartment bi-weekly now. They've learned to leave expectations at the door. Richard even started driving a Honda, joking that if a billionaire can be happy in a Civic, he can downsize from his Mercedes. The story made business news briefly, but I refused interviews. What happened at that table wasn't magazine content, it was personal, about family and values and what matters when you strip away wealth and performances. One night, 6 months later, Elena and I sat on our balcony watching city lights. She asked if I ever regretted it, letting them humiliate me when I could have just told truth. I said not once, because now I know. I know her parents love her more than their pride. I know she chose me for myself, and I know I don't need anyone's permission to be exactly who I am. She asked who I am exactly. I told her I'm a data analyst, a billionaire investor, her husband, and the guy who proved the most powerful people in any room are usually the ones nobody's watching. Somewhere across town, Richard was probably working late, learning his own company like he should have all along. In their mansion, Victoria was probably planning their next visit, making sure not to overdress. And here in our apartment, we deliberately chose. Elena and I were wealthy in the only ways that actually matter. We had each other, we had honesty, and we had a future built on something more solid than money could buy. Because ultimately, that check didn't change everything. What mattered was when people showed who they really were and what you chose to do with that information. I chose love and honesty over revenge. I chose proving character matters more than bank accounts, that the best victories are ones nobody sees coming. Richard tried buying me for $750,000, not realizing I'd already bought his respect. It just took him 4 years and one devastating dinner to figure it out.